Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Welcome to Karate Without Belts. I'm John.
I'm Jeremy.
Welcome back, folks. Our ongoing war with Jeff Bezos. It's we finally won. I got a bunch of crap I have to send back now. But in concluding that saga, Jeremy, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Not too bad. It's been kind of a hectic week, but that's all right. So it's all good.
Not getting mad at any karate people on the internet.
None that I really want to talk about. How's that? So
That's fine.
but
That's fine.
I'm trying to stay. I'm trying to stay away from that and just it just wasn't a big deal. There's just one thing that just kind of irritated me, and I was just like, so it's not like I'm going to go out on Face World or drop a hash brown or something like that out there and just kind of say I can't.
I haven't had a hash brown in years. All right. But yeah, there's where we were discussing prior to odd information what people will put out on the internet, and it'll just be like, "This is the real thing of a thing of a thing," or like, "I've found the real." And this is where I come to it on origins and stuff. I mean, you may find someone has talked about the origin of something, but you really can't say that was the original intention, or that was what maybe one person had the idea for, but that wasn't necessarily everybody. So that's just me.
Well, I guess I'll get into it a little bit now that you kind of pushed and pried a little bit. But there was somebody that was explaining their expertise on a certain weapon. It was like, okay, I was actually kind of interested to watch it, and I started watching on YouTube, and within, I don't know, 30 seconds, I counted almost 30 basic errors. I mean, literally to where it's like a novice could have disarmed this person with the weapon. It's like, at least have some basics to not do at least that and be mindful of it. I mean, training that kind of is not good. Not I just kind of irritated me because just a lot of people were buying into it. Oh, this is the greatest thing. I'm like, oh, this pretty well sucks. But anyway,
I mean, that goes to say, like, don't believe everything we say on this program may or may not be true. But this is where I say it's like, we talk about opinion, we talk about experience, and we talk about kind of how we've dealt with stuff, but we never present anything as wholly fact, as it were.
right. And I mean, I'm not getting into, oh, well, he should have done this and he was wrong this. I mean, it was literally so bad. I mean, a novice could have disarmed at any point while this person was working with his weapon. I was just, this is terrible. And it was really sad. I was really, like I said, I was really wanting to watch it. And it's just, after 30 seconds, I had to turn it off and just like, I cannot believe this person's
That popular.
Yeah, there's that and a bowl of cherries. It's like, this is terrible. But anyway, and I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not, and I'm not the world expert on anything. It was just, it was really bad.
Well, and that goes into like having a platform and saying something, then people believing you. But if you're incorrect, then you have to. Then it's kind of the onus is on you to kind of have a disclaimer about that in some way, shape, or form, or to at least explain, like, this is from my perspective, or this is what I've learned, this is what I've taken away. Then that way, people don't look to you as an authority. I think that's one thing we'll be getting into today is kind of the fine coin on that, where we talked about before, the I guess driving relational aesthetic that karate has is teacher and student, and
Yeah.
probably one of the things I guess modern day martial arts media has kind of come up on is, the quality of the teacher versus the quality of the lesson, and whether or not, is one more indicative of the other. So, not just for the teacher's abilities, but also the teacher's character, and whether or not you can separate the quality of the lessons or the quality of what information you're getting from the quality of the person. I think that's where we're going to get into. I think good teachers, bad lessons, bad teachers, good lessons.
Yeah. One of the things, like whenever I was looking for somebody to train with, after my initial period with Robbie, I'd always look for the person's character. I'm like, okay, this person, good person. I can get behind. I can get behind them not only just on a lesson level, but on a personal level. And I think sometimes that helps the bond between instructor and student. Would you agree or disagree on that?
No, I would say that's something you need to measure up with. So I think a lot of us will have this experience where we have some sort of initial experience, good, bad, or indifferent. Anybody who I think who continues on with martial arts is generally has some sort of positive experience, right?
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, things move on, life changes, people move, people quit, whatever. We tend to kind of go around from teacher to teacher. Anybody who thinks that doesn't happen, or that doesn't really have that kind of mentality, they must be really lucky to have the same teacher for a long time. But
Well, I totally disagree with that because I think you don't have different perspectives.
right, and that's what I mean, where it's like
Yeah,
somebody who's been in the same place forever and a day, and their teacher's been there forever and a day, and they've never had to have been challenged in terms of a life event changing that, or circumstances changing that, won't have that perspective, that kind of needing to kind of measure up another person.
or I mean, add into that even someone being confronted with themselves, dealing with somebody different. I mean, you can even look at it. You can look at it from teacher student, even in a school setting.
Right.
There are a lot of similarities. I remember in college there was this one instructor that we had, one of the nicest guys you ever met. I mean, he would do anything for you, but he made Ben Stein look like a master thespian, just saying Bueller, Bueller. I mean, literally, the guy was like, almost everybody would drool out, and he he was not a very good teacher, but the guy had a ton of knowledge. And what was sad is you really wanted him to teach his knowledge. It just wasn't there.
Person has the ability, has all that knowledge, but they have no skill to orate or anything like that.
Right,
So
right. And I've definitely run into that into martial arts. And I've run into that. I think part of it is that teacher student relationship. That teacher has to really understand their student. So I'm going to put the onus on the teacher for right now. The teacher has to really understand that student and know what motivates them to get moving. And depending upon the size of what your classes are, who your student base is, that can be very difficult. I mean, if you've got 100 plus students, it's going to take time to get to know all your students and what really motivates.
I mean, you might not even get that chance with that many students.
Yeah, yeah. Anymore, I don't want that big students. So.
Well, and I think any place that has that level of students will probably hopefully have other instructors around, and I think that gets to a point where it's that you don't know your students and you're not able to push them or motivate them, then you're not going to be a very effective teacher, and you will probably eventually close down. What I've seen, I guess one way I can put this is spinning from my own experiences. In like a 2 year time span, I saw really good people who are not necessarily great martial artists, who I think they understood what martial arts they understood.
Hmm.
I guess it's kind of like anybody does, but they could not generate it past that. They couldn't get past that because of the exact problem we were talking about before, simply being in the same place with the same people, even though these people have interacted with, like, went to seminars or like interacted with different people from different places, they very rarely, I don't want to say let that affect them, but it very rarely had a profound, deep effect on them.
Well,
Um,
I'd change that up to where it's what drives them and what they're actually committed to and what they're learning.
right, and I think
So,
these folks, they're good people, like
yeah.
really
Oh, yeah.
good mentors to me. But they just kind of couldn't get out of their bubble, and they didn't see a kind of a reason why they needed to. Meanwhile, the person who was running the program didn't have an idea what they were doing, like had no vision, like for what they wanted.
Right.
Um, they were just kind of like doing whatever was popular at the time, or whatever was easy, or path of least resistance. Why not teach yoga? Well, make other
Or,
people who got a black belt with me 10 years ago make them teach the class.
or as I like to call it, martial arts flavor of the month. But,
Well, and that was the thing where we were pulsating between. I can get specific about this. Is where it's like Krav Maga ish tapes and street self defense from like early 2000s Google search and Okinawan karate and modern arnis and like whatever they wanted to kind of do. And so
well,
it was the owner of the school just had who had no at that time no interest in teaching martial arts, just kind of throwing out whatever to his students or to people who were teaching. And these people who were teaching, they're good people, and I think they were working with the best with what they had,
yeah,
but they themselves could not get past what they were given.
yeah.
And this had caused conflict in people to leave, myself included. But to kind of be on the other side of that, where it's like good people with not necessarily great lessons. In a year's time, I was in some probably somebody who should not have had any business being around anybody teaching martial arts.
Hmm.
I was in this person's house and they were teaching me like stuff I don't necessarily think was all that useful in the end. But at the time, I was like, this is the real stuff. This is like real martial arts. And like, probably was being abusive, but puts you in a kind of understanding that, like, oh, this is real.
Yeah,
To the point where he's like, this is a loaded gun.
yeah,
Here, hold the loaded gun. Scare the shit out of you, right? This
yeah,
is real.
yeah,
And so, like, those kind of lessons I would have never experienced in that other place. At the same time, that kind of lesson probably could have been done in a much safer way, in a much healthier way.
yeah.
But that lesson I still have with me to this day. A loaded gun in your hand, a real loaded gun in your hand with someone who wasn't afraid to use it. Now, I won't go into details about who this person was, where they are today, but suffice to say, that person's not teaching martial arts anymore,
No,
publicly or privately.
I, I got you. No, I remember. You know, I'd been training 7, 8 years, and I started. I mean, Robbie had already closed up shop. I'd kind of gone and done my own thing, and I was like, I'd really like to train with somebody who I really respect. And there's a guy I knew since basically the beginning of my martial arts journey, one of the most stand up people I've ever met in my life. I mean, just really good guy. I mean, just like I said, just really good guy. And I knew the guy had a lot of skill, and it was like, okay, maybe this wouldn't be too bad. So I started training with him, and it got to a point where I don't train well under somebody that wants to make sure every exact little movement is correct. I got to figure that out. So I don't need a micromanaging instructor. Now, maybe some people do, but and that never really worked really well with me. And yeah, it wasn't very long after that. It was like, it's just time for me to move on and just kind of do some other things, and go somewhere else. So, which ended up being all right. I mean, and that gets into one of the cases of great. I mean, just superb person, but just really terrible instructor. I mean, he just wasn't real good.
Well, and so let me ask you a question on that. Do you feel that that was a you and him problem, or you and them problem, or was that a you that teacher and was everyone else who was training under them feeling the same way?
I think some people were feeling the same way. I think some people didn't have a problem with it because I think you get into the mindset of some students in the martial arts. And if you get into some of these people's minds, some of them will not be able to think for themselves. I'm sorry, some of them don't. You've probably met some of them at some of the seminars we've been at. I mean, I can tell you the names of them offline. I'm not going to here.
Offline, when we get the cups and the line across nations going.
Yeah, I
But
mean, and they weren't bad people, but it was almost like kind of like that share moment with Nicolas Cage and Moonstruck, and she goes up to Nicolas Cage and slaps him. It's like, snap out of it. I mean, that's what you want to do with these people. It's like, snap out of it. You're not a machine. Think, it's
well, and you were mentioning this teaching style was overly detailed.
Oh
Um,
yeah, I mean, it got to the point where if your feet were even, I mean, literally a quarter of an inch off, he would go and correct it and stop what you were doing, correct it, move forward. Now, I can appreciate that level of detail. I really can. Number one, I gotta feel it for me. Number two, that may not be what needs to happen with me, if that makes sense.
right. Well, and it's like also if you had experience prior to that, so
Right.
and now could you imagine somebody who had just started with this person? Do you think they would have this, or the kind of it is kind of more novice groups? Do you think they appreciated that level of detail, or do you think that was just frustrating people?
I think to a point, maybe some people did, but I think other people really felt as if it was coming across as condescending. After a little, I can see it, for, like the first 3 to 6 months, like, okay, I'm trying to get all this done. But if you're doing this up through, brown, black, whatever, after 4 years or so, that's going to get old and that's going to get tiring.
So that was that's just ineffective teaching them.
Yeah, and what was interesting is person when I went in, there was only one other student that was at a senior instructor or senior student status, and they'd been there like 7 years. Everybody else was, I mean, basically beginner.
So is attrition. So the attrition rate's high because of over attention to detail.
Right.
So you'd say so in this category we categorize that as good teacher, but completely ineffective. Much like your Ben Stein esque professor from the beginning.
To a point, yes, but it was an effective teacher to the point of almost detriment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense because I mean I don't know if you've read Funakoshi's book about karate, karate, my life, my story,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
whatever.
Oh, many, many moons ago, yes.
Yeah, me too. And I remember one story in there where he talks about like somebody like I think the translation in English may not be so great. Again, this is a long time ago, but it's effectively the same problem. It's where where you have a teacher who is too headstrong about the exact details. Where you go in the other direction with this, and you get people who don't care about what your beginners are doing until they stick around long enough, and then you can actually teach them the right thing.
Yeah.
That's a problem. That's a different problem, and that's a teaching method I honestly don't agree with.
I, yeah, I don't completely agree with yeah, I'm kind of like 70-30. I mean, I can see trying to get them up to a point of interest to where you can actually start teaching them to where they're interested in it, if that makes sense.
But it's not even teaching them correctly. It's just
Yeah,
this is how I teach white belts. This is how I teach black belt. Like it's kind of like that kind of attitude. I don't feel that's. I don't think it's actually helpful for growth for anybody's growth. You as a teacher or you as a student, you or your students, because that means you're effectively like just winging it, like very like phoning it in with students in one hand, and then from a teacher's perspective, if you phone it in, that becomes your teaching style.
no,
And it's also learning like I don't need to expend that much energy on this part because I know we need to expend more energy on this part. But we just need to like go like we're talking about stances or something like that. Basic simple explanation is better than over correcting constantly to the point where you are making your students look down at their feet constantly.
yeah. And then, yeah, then you don't trust your feet, you don't trust anything you're doing. Yeah, exactly.
So that's going in like a really bad direction one way or the other. But you were talking to me a little before about another teacher you had around that time who was kind of maybe in the opposite end of that.
I did have another instructor who I will say this he had quite an ego, and it was very interesting. But
Do you think it was earned?
huh?
That ego was earned?
Well, I mean he was very very skilled, and I was only with this person for maybe a month or 2 months because literally his ego really drove me absolutely insane. He really did set more of my mindset on how to train as opposed to trying to check off different things. It was more along the lines of here's your mindset, this is how you really need to be doing it. And what was interesting is, I look back on it, Robbie was getting me to that point, but this guy got me boom. I mean, it was like almost like a huge shift in my training.
So how do you think that happened? Do you want to talk us through how that happened?
Well, I don't know. Yeah, it was
In a way that won't get anyone in trouble.
yeah, it was
Podcasting, folks. When we're talking about people we don't want to necessarily mention, it's like being in the mob.
no. I will not. It was one class I had really ticked him off. I mean, like shit. He had me stand at attention stance for almost an entire hour. Yeah, I mean, wasn't Seiza, wasn't. I mean, it was attention stance for an hour while he lectured me on different aspects of karate, and I mean, technically, maybe it was a little bit kind of an accidental insult. It wasn't like a it wasn't like an intention. It was like an accidental slip of the tongue, and it was something that I go back to it. And my lesson was at like 5:30 in the morning. Yeah, and so I mean, I'm kind of I'm getting ready to train at 5:30 in the morning because that was the only time I could get with this person. It was, oh, most of the lessons were like, okay, I know how to do this. I know, and I get, you got to do repetition, but it was way over the top.
What kind of stuff would he have you do?
Oh, I mean, he just had me do front kicks. He had me do front kicks for 45 minutes.
Same
And
leg?
same leg. I mean, it was. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I can appreciate repetition as much as anybody, but it's like at that point, I was paying this person an extreme premium to come in at 5:30 in the morning. So a little bit of it was like, I'm paying a premium. I think it's like, look, and he knew that I'd been training. It was kind of close to the other person. I'd been training. At that point, I was kind of searching for who I wanted to take me kind of a next level. I mean, I'd been training about 7, 8 years already, and it's like it wasn't so much, well, I'm better than this, but it was just like, come on, let's give me something that I can bite off of, and it really wasn't much. I mean, it was a good lesson whenever, I look back at it. It's like, I really wish I wouldn't have done that. But on the same token, it's like maybe my training wouldn't have been quite so. Well, it was still pretty intense, but maybe it just totally took another turn of that intensity at that point.
From that attention lesson, when you just said you in attention, what do you think you picked up from that you don't think you would have picked up if you had gone somewhere else or have been under someone else? Or like say in an alternate reality, Robbie had never closed down and you just continued with him,
I mean,
or anything, something like that.
it was just the perspective of how I looked at training at that point. Personally, if he would have done that like my very first lesson, and then went from there, maybe it would have been a little bit better. I don't know. I think I was with him for about 3 or 4 months,
Right.
but this is like 4 months in, and he knew that I trained for a little bit, so it was like, yeah, it just wasn't the best teacher student relationship. So that's okay. I still learned from it, but I think the other thing I learned from it was people. I think the one thing I learned from it as an instructor is you got to get into what the students there for, because if you don't, you're eventually going to run into a brick wall and animosity through the whole thing.
And because I'm thinking about through kind of our initial premise of good teacher, bad lesson, or bad teacher, good lesson,
Hmm.
and that can, I don't want to say it's highly subjective, but in when you bring it up like that where it's what is the person searching for, what is the person there for, I mean it
Hmm.
is, because one good lesson for one person is one bad, it can be one bad lesson for another.
Right.
And it makes me think about my teaching. What is the quality? What is the quality of a lesson? What is the quality of the time on the floor? Not just knowing what your students, getting to know what your students are there for, what they're motivated for, but how do you catch a lot of, what makes up a good lesson, and then how do you pair that with at least presenting yourself as a good teacher?
Yeah. And that's something that I've taken to Robbie taught me when I was starting to kind of get up to the point where I was starting to, instruct a little bit on, inside the dojo. He mentioned one thing, and it's always stuck to me. It's like your purpose as an instructor is when your students walk in, you give them something so that they're better when they walk out. And simple, easy to understand, and that's kind of what I've always tried to follow.
Do you think that in doing so, there needs to be a form of intensity involved in order to show that? I remember I was reading a lot. I've been thinking about this a lot lately of just kind of karate of yesteryear. People, kind of the old USGIs during Korea and Vietnam, talking about like how they initially met their teachers, right?
Hmm.
And there's always some inciting point where it was like, this is intense, this is great, this is like we're in the backyard doing 100 front kicks and 100 squat kicks and stuff like that. And in having that kind of intensity from a physical perspective, but also from a mental perspective, I feel is what kind of, at least at that time, drove people.
Well, I don't think necessarily intensity. It can be. I think it's more intentionality.
Right. And if what you what's the point of the lesson? Is it just a workout?
Right. And I,
Which is not something to demean that, because I feel there's a group of people who are more on this side of well, we don't need the workout part. We don't need the workout side. We just need the study side, and that's maybe a different discussion for a different day. But you
Right.
know what? There's an intent, like there's an intentional lesson behind what's going on in each lesson.
But
And
but but I'm going to add on to this. But I think there has to be intentionality on both sides
right,
because I mean I go back to the lesson from Sensei Oyada, in which we're in there, and he starts on his little speech saying you can't do my technique, and nobody was listening to him, and I picked up enough to where it's like, okay, he's wanting to say something important, so I just stopped. And then that's when he said, and I can't do your technique either. And it was like, bingo, you have to own it. And what's really interesting, I don't know if I mentioned this, one of the guys who was in there in that night, he was training with us. It was funny because I ran into him 10 years later, and we were just sitting down talking, and he just came out and asked, he goes, "What was the best lesson you learned from Mr. Yada?" Sensei. And I told him that story, and he goes, "Were we in the gym or were we in the cafeteria that night as opposed to the gym?" I'm like, "Yep." And he goes, "Holy cow! Since you told me that, I now remember it. I remember him saying it. I just never got it." He goes, "I totally remember him saying that."
yeah, and that is for a lot of people a good teacher teaching a good lesson, right?
Yeah,
I
and
was not. I'm not there. I don't personally know. Didn't personally know. From what I know, a lot of people say he was always a great teacher. He was always always a good person. So, but anything that goes on the onus on the students, to kind of counterpoint what you said before, where the onus, like the teacher did everything they could at that point, right?
yeah, yeah, and it's up to the student to either accept the lesson or not. And as an instructor, I mean, you can't force feed everything to somebody, but it's like you just try to, as Robbie always said, try to make them a little better than when they walked in.
And do you think that, regardless of personality, we can actually do that? Because I think that's where I think that where it gets prickly, because you can get like crazy people like I was
Oh
dealing
yeah,
with, where they're like, I'm gonna hand you a loaded handgun. Now you're a ninth dan. How does it feel?
yeah.
Which is kind of funny because I'm like, why can't you just say I'm a tenth dan now? Why did you have to stop at ninth? Like, what is it? It's like, is tenth dan like nuclear bomb
Well, I
type
mean,
stuff?
if you look at some websites, I mean, why stop at 10? Let's make it 21. I'm 21th on or whatever.
Turn it up to 11th dan.
Yeah,
Um,
we're just gonna skip over that whole 10 thing. No, I think
just make 10 higher.
I, I
Um,
think I think it gets into kind of what, not to say like corporate America kind of stuff, but I think it gets into what is your mission for actually teaching. And maybe, just maybe, you're not the one to totally make a huge impact on this person, but maybe it is just a, hey, just plant this little thing. Maybe 5, 10 years later down the road, maybe they're gonna pick up on it. But I think if your mission or your goal or your vision is, to try to make somebody a little better whenever they walk out than when they walked in, yeah, I mean, you can't stop crazy and you can't stop stupid. It's like those two things, they're gonna be
right. Well,
there.
and like that's on both perspectives, because from the student's perspective, you need to be able to recognize create, and it's hard. It's hard because, especially if you're a student, you don't want to disappoint, right? Um, but at the same time, you have to recognize the crazy. You have to recognize this. When a teacher does something stupid, I would say most of my lessons, probably for the first 5 years, were kind of crap. um,
Well,
in both karate and professionally. And I
well,
wouldn't say that, but like, a teacher learns and grows as a person, and you learn and grow as a person too. But you're right in saying that what your goal is as a teacher should always be to to progress just a little bit, if anything else.
Yeah, I mean, and I think if you keep that, I think that's always kind of helped me stay centered on trying to make sure I get into that world of that student, if that makes sense, because that way I'm not okay. This is the way I'm going to teach, and I'm not going to veer off from this way of teaching and things like that. It's like maybe this way works for this person, but it doesn't work for that person. Don't know until you get there.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess one thing we should probably say, you might not always be with the same teacher forever, or you might have a really bad experience or a really bad teacher, someone who comes away as not such a good person, but I think there is a way to kind of parse the person from the lesson.
Sometimes, I mean, there is, and then I'd also say sometimes there's not, because in a way you do kind of want to give that person credit as well.
And you might not want to give that person credit if that person, right. And in that case, it's okay to have a clean slate. And
Right.
it's, and that goes into, abusive relationships that people have had with their teachers. Which, I mean, I can say thankfully that this, person I was referring to, the people I was referring to, it kind of went both in opposite directions, where people I initially trained with don't really speak to anymore, but
Yeah.
I still have a lot of good memories from that, even if I don't necessarily do anything from that time that I practiced or trained.
Yeah.
But even though I kind of have some of those better instincts from that terrible from that terrible person, I don't necessarily attribute those instincts to that person.
No, I can see that. Yeah. One of the interesting things that I've come across has been trying to find people that really don't look like they know anything, and really search those kind of people out and really get them to come to the forefront with their knowledge.
Not necessarily publicly.
No, not necessarily publicly. I mean, just so mainly so I can learn from them, because a lot of times people that don't look like they know squat are some of the most informative people you'll ever run into.
Right. You've got to be kind of careful about that. I feel you have to have a good sense for people.
Right.
Like, and that's how I felt when I was with that crazy guy with the gun. Like, that guy was really informed. That guy had a lot of knowledge. He was
Right.
also nuts. So,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I go into a lot of different things, such as there's one person out there. I don't want to give away that person's name. The person does not come across as very knowledgeable, but when you get with that person, he's extremely knowledgeable, almost down to the inner workings, a lot of things, and it in some ways it's kind of refreshing to kind of bounce things off that person and stuff. So and I think that's probably all I'll get into it. And I've learned some really good things from him too. So, but yeah, it is interesting whenever you find somebody like that. It's like, okay, what's your point of view? What's this? It definitely has given me, technical ability along with mindset processing. So I'm like, cool, all right. So
yeah, and having those people to work with is important. I mean, despite what's going on right now with the world, have good connections with people and get together and just train. And then, not even a sort of overly formal way. It can be not just a benefit, but also like in a long-term way. You can really develop not just yourself, but other people you want to teach with those people as well. And it's kind of having the kind of martial arts community aspect to it. Whereas, as opposed to like, we must have this formal organization. You must be the treasurer. You must be like, that type of stuff, not so much. But, like genuinely a community where people can, just get together and train and hang and, try out ideas. And that's that.
and if you kind of look back at how a lot of this was started, I mean, there was not treasurers and presidents and heads of organizations. It was like people getting together and training. Period.
The only time that ever happened was when there's money involved.
Yeah, and
Which, if that's the case with this podcast, we demand 10%. That's it. If not, there's going to be a VIG. That's what I get for watching Donnie Brocco last night.
oh,
Jeremy's both shaking his head and head at me and laughing at the same time. All right. Anything else we want to kind of knock on this before we get out of here?
I think that kind of covers it. I mean, you've definitely got different aspects, and I think the main thing is whenever you're being taught something, just no matter what, whether you're the instructor and learning from the student or you're a student learning from the instructor, look at the situation. If something's kind of nagging at you about a certain situation, just kind of go back and replay it and look at it and analyze it and see what is it that you're actually learning from it.
Right.
Maybe something key overall to huge growth throughout your not only martial arts but just personal life as well.
Yeah, and I think there can be it is important to reflect on what you're doing with a teacher, and it's important to understand where your limits need to be with certain people's personalities. Kind of maybe one of the things we said last time is that people might not be the best people for you to be around. Doesn't necessarily make them bad people, but there are definitely bad people out there.
Yeah.
And you need to be aware of that. But that doesn't necessarily mean those experiences with those people are completely invalid.
Right.
Jeremy, what are you working on today? Or not today, this week?
I'll be going back to Sai and Manji Sai a lot this week, so I spent quite a bit of time with Manji Sai this last week and was like really getting in the groove again with that. So
I've got to reclaim my. I have to get Manji Sai hopefully before the beginning of next year, just so I can get back to that. Assuming I can get down to Okinawa. Sharada refuses to send me anything, so I don't like calling that out because.
oops.
Well, oops. No, it was more a matter of like. It was. I think I mentioned this. Maybe I mentioned this here before, but it was basically I wanted to order like kind of longer weapons. And they effectively told me that it's going to cost the same amount for the weapon to actually ship it, so you essentially be paying double. And if you live in the area, you should just wait until you come down to get it. So, I guess they just didn't want to be bothered with actually going to the post office and actually shipping it. But it's better than actually going to Okinawa and trying to buy something when in your home country you have the exact same products.
Yeah.
And then ordering something that won't come for 3 months and they have to be shipped to you anyway. But this week, I think this might be something we talk about next time. Is that goal casting, kind of what is the best way to kind of do goals and stuff, and that's what I'm just trying to work on this week is setting up smaller goals for myself. With the pandemic and everything, I was working on training for a marathon and that got canceled, and so I'm without kind of having a North Star to kind of aim for, kind of training kind of be like, well, I'll just do this week, but there's no kind of what am I going for, what is my goal. So just trying to figure out what are some overall goals I want to seek in my training, both in karate and in other stuff. Well, we'll be signing off here. Everybody stay safe. I guess stay warm. The pumpkin spice season is in. So not here, but
hey, down the road we have like my daughter. She's been asking when we can go pumpkin hunting. And I'm like, hold on. So we always go out to the pumpkin patches and stuff, and so there's a couple places that make pumpkin donuts and stuff. And I will say this: if you've never had a pumpkin donut, yeah, that beats a pumpkin spice latte or whatever whoever's selling. I mean, that beats it about tenfold. That's pretty awesome. So
you've heard it on this podcast here, for folks. If Jeremy thinks if you haven't had pumpkin donut in your life, you have not lived yet.
It's interesting. My wife does not. She can't stand anything pumpkin, but the donuts from that place. It's like, oh yeah, this is bomb.
Is there any way to somehow infuse that into Okinawa donuts? That would be interesting. But that's a different discussion for a different time. So
Exactly.
thanks to I forgot to call this out last time. Thanks to Monica Azuma for our theme. I got a promise here that I'd say that every time, and literally the second time we had the theme on, I forgot. So I'm gonna try to we split it into the podcast somehow every time. This is us signing off. You guys, everybody have a great week, and don't forget to keep training.